When we talk about the state's fiscal future, as I mentioned, we can't anticipate the times that we're experiencing now with the oil prices continuing long term. Now, this slide represents the projections from about 4 or 5 months ago. The state in the spring and the fall, we go through the exercise of forecasting oil prices, forecasting oil production, and looking out in the near and ultimately the long term. And what this slide represents is in the spring, given the price forecast that we had at the time, the production profile that we were facing, we were looking at moving from a time of surplus into a time of deficits fairly quickly. If you look at it today, given the fact that since the spring prices have continued to go up as opposed to going down, that this is going to look different, but basically it's just going to shift it further to the right. We've all experienced that. Alaska's fiscal demise has always been just a few years ahead, and we've been fortunate enough to have that stave off. But we can anticipate at some point we're going to face the world that we faced just a few years ago, with budget deficits and decisions to make in terms of how to address those. So the suggestion that I'm making is that we can identify some portion of this, go on to the next slide, that would be beyond what we currently need to run state government. Move that forward, next slide, and then the final slide, use that to cover some future deficit that otherwise would be created and avoid the need to obtain the income at that time. Use the available revenues today to meet tomorrow's needs. Next slide. So ACES is trying to balance these two state objectives to ensure that we do not overly burden the oil industry so that they will not pursue those projects that we identified as being critical to maintaining our production level, but also recognize the opportunity to capture some of that surplus value that's coming in at these times and ensure that the state gets its fair share so that we could use those in the future. And so it's this balance that we're trying to strike. How are you going to make that, identify that tipping point? Where's the tipping point where we're going to end up sacrificing one of our values for the other? The analysis that we've provided to the legislature and that we've done indicates that we're not there with the proposal that we're making. We're not going to sacrifice investment in capturing this fair share. So let's back up a little bit and talk about why we're pursuing ACES, why the legislature is here today. And look at it from the context of, again, our relationship with the oil industry and the message that we're sending with regard to Alaska as an attractive place to come and invest in oil and gas opportunities. And one of the things that is part of that evaluation from the company is this question of stability. Is Alaska a stable fiscal system? And when they talk about stability, what they're looking at is what's our expectation in the future? Can we expect the terms that we're being faced with today to be the ones that we're going to enjoy when we're hopefully reaping the benefits of our investment? And they're going to use a number of different things to evaluate that. They're going to look at the state's history. How often are they changing their system? They're going to look at where do things stand right now with the decisions that are being made, and what's the expectation that we're going to be facing a revisiting of these issues again in the future. And we believe that anybody who looks at today's situation and looks at what came about because of PPT would have to recognize that PPT is not a long-term stable solution. And the reason for that is primarily that it lacks public confidence. And it does that for a number of reasons. A year ago, we were in a completely different place in terms of this issue. When the legislature was facing the question of changing the oil taxes, it was in the context of a much broader proposed relationship with the oil industry and the context of the stranded gas contract to get a gas line and to get the producers to agree to move forward with that project. And the previous administration that came forward with this tax proposal that resulted in PPT was doing so part and parcel with this broader vision that, hey, if we do this, then we can lock this in and we can get the commitment to move this gas line project ahead. And there was a desperation in that timeline to say, we've got to do it now. We've got to do it now because we're going to lose the gas line unless we get this done, and we've got to do it in a way that the companies will agree to. And so they came forward, first 25-20, and then said, oh, no, they don't agree with that. It's going to be 2020. And we have to stick to 2020 because otherwise we're going to lose a gas line. And through that process, what we ended up with was a tax that was a part of what never came to be, this bigger picture. And there are numerous provisions within PPT that were negotiated as part of the stranded gas contract and were included in there as part of this broader deal. And the politics that surrounded the decision on what the rate should be, how we should address progressivity, how we should address various aspects of that tax, were part and parcel with a negotiated deal with 3 of the producers, and not necessarily an evaluation of what truly is in the state's interest in terms of its tax program. And so that was basically strike one. It was born out of a failed concept, which is the previous gas line deal. When Governor Palin came into office, she recognized that there was a question with regard to PPT. She stated that in her first State of the State address and said she was skeptical about the tax system and would be watching closely as her administration attempted to administer it. And she said at the time that if there were any surprises, we would revisit it. And then we had 2 more surprises in the spring. First, we had the checks that came in. The first were referred to as true-up payments from the companies. They came in significantly less than what was anticipated. And when the reports came in with it, it indicated that the costs that had been used to calculate the tax when PPT was being evaluated did not reflect the reality of the cost on the North Slope. And the checks that came in were significantly less than you would have expected when PPT was being debated. That was strike 2. And then shortly thereafter came the indictments and what followed. And that basically was strike 3. So what we're facing now is we're facing a tax system that doesn't have the confidence of the people, and they expect their leaders to address that. And so we need to do that. We need to address that. We need to restore the public confidence so that the tax system that we have in place is one that the industry can rely upon. And the industry can say, yeah, Alaska's going to be stable because now they have something that they believe in. The second aspect of PPT is that it was something that was seen as being implemented in a completely different way than the way it's going to turn out, which is it was seen as being part of a changed relationship with the companies. It was going to be implemented through this agreement. It was going to be implemented through contractual relationship that would, if there was disputes, it would go to an arbitration panel. The state did not provide itself with the tools that you would normally expect in a tax system that we're going to implement through a typical exercise of taxing authorities. And those tools became glaringly obvious as we attempted to move forward with implementing a net-based tax that requires the state to assess what the costs are going to be, identify whether they're appropriate to be deducted, and then decide if the taxpayer is paying the right amount at the end. And so we need those tools that we attribute to 3 things: people, information, clear rules.